Cleopatra. The most famous suicide in history was probably not a suicide. For 2,000 years, the world has accepted a story about a queen, a basket of figs, and a cobra. It is a beautiful story. It is also, by every measure that modern toxicology can apply, almost certainly a lie. And the truth it was designed to cover may be far more dangerous than any snake. On August 12, 30 BCE, Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, the woman who had held the Roman Republic at arm's length for 2 decades through intelligence, diplomacy, and strategic alliance, was found dead in her chambers in Alexandria. She was 39 years old. Beside her lay the bodies of her 2 handmaidens, Iris and Charmian. According to the Roman historian Plutarch, writing more than a century after the event, Charmian was still alive when the guards entered, barely, adjusting the diadem on Cleopatra's head. One of the guards asked if this was right. Charmian reportedly said it was entirely right, and fitting for the descendant of so many kings. Then she collapsed and died. It is a magnificent scene. It reads like theater, and that should be the first warning. The snake enters the story almost as an afterthought. Plutarch himself hedges. He reports that some said a cobra, an asp in the terminology of the ancient world, had been smuggled into the chamber hidden among figs. He also reports that no snake was found. He also reports that some said she carried poison in a hollow hairpin. He offers multiple versions because he does not know which one is true. No one did. And yet, across 20 centuries of retelling, the cobra became the only version that survived. Why? Because it was the version Rome wanted. To understand why the snake story is toxicologically implausible, you need to understand what cobra venom actually does to a human body. The Egyptian cobra, Najahaje, delivers a primarily neurotoxic venom. Upon envenomation, the toxins bind to acetylcholine receptors at neuromuscular junctions, progressively blocking the signals that allow muscles to contract. The process is neither quick nor quiet. Clinical literature on cobra envenomation describes a sequence that unfolds over 1 to 8 hours. Initial sharp pain and swelling at the bite site, followed by progressive ptosis, drooping of the eyelids, difficulty swallowing, slurred speech, nausea, and eventually respiratory paralysis as the diaphragm loses the ability to contract. Death, when it occurs, comes from suffocation. The victim is conscious for much of this process. This is not the peaceful, regal death described by Plutarch. This is not a queen arranging herself on a golden couch and slipping away with dignity. This is a prolonged, physically distressing medical emergency that would have been visible, audible, and unmistakable to anyone nearby. But the toxicological problems do not stop there. A single Egyptian cobra produces on average between 175 and 300 milligrams of venom per bite. The lethal dose for an adult human is estimated at 15 to 20 milligrams, meaning a single full bite carries enough venom to kill. But venom delivery is not a controlled pharmaceutical process. Snakes do not always deliver a full payload. Dry bites, strikes that inject little or no venom, occur in a significant percentage of cobra attacks. And here's the critical problem. There were 3 bodies in that room. For one cobra to kill 3 adult women in sequence, it would need to deliver a lethal dose 3 times in rapid succession. Each bite depletes the venom glands. After a full envenomation, a cobra requires days, sometimes weeks, to regenerate its supply. The idea that a single snake killed Cleopatra, then Iris, then Charmian, delivering a lethal dose each time in the correct order, without anyone fleeing, without the snake being found afterward, is not a plausible toxicological scenario. It is a narrative convenience, and narratives serve the people who construct them. If the cobra did not kill Cleopatra, what did? The answer has been sitting in the historical record for centuries, overlooked because it is less dramatic than a serpent and more uncomfortable than a suicide. Cleopatra was, by the testimony of multiple ancient sources, a woman of considerable pharmaceutical knowledge. She was not merely educated. She was, in the terminology of her era, a scholar of what the Greeks called pharmaca, substances that could heal or kill depending on dosage and preparation. Plutarch himself notes that she had conducted experiments on condemned prisoners, testing various poisons to observe their effects, seeking one that would produce death without excessive pain or disfigurement. This is not the behavior of a woman who would leave her own death to the unpredictable biology of a reptile. This is the behavior of a woman who would choose her instrument with precision. In 2010, German historian and toxicologist Christoph Schaefer published an analysis that proposed a specific alternative. Schaefer argued that the combination of hemlock, wolfsbane, and opium, all readily available in the ancient Mediterranean pharmacopoeia, could produce death within a few hours, with a clinical presentation far more consistent with the peaceful scene described by the ancient sources. Hemlock causes ascending paralysis. Wolfsbane, derived from the plant aconitum, induces cardiac arrhythmia and eventual heart failure. Opium provides sedation and analgesic effect. Together, administered as a blended draft, they would produce a progressively deepening unconsciousness, followed by cardiac arrest. A death that could, in fact, look like sleep. A death that 3 women could share from the same vessel. The poison theory does not require a cobra that was never found. It does not require a single snake to perform 3 sequential envenomations. It does not require the venom to behave in ways that contradict everything clinical toxicology tells us about neurotoxic snakebite. It requires only that Cleopatra did what the sources say she was already doing, applied her knowledge of poisons to the one problem she could not solve any other way. But there is a third possibility, and it is the one that Roman political history makes most plausible. Gaius Octavian, the future Augustus, the man who would become the first Roman emperor, had a problem, and her name was Cleopatra. For over a decade, Cleopatra had been the axis around which Roman civil war had partly turned. Her alliance with Julius Caesar had produced a son, Caesarion, whose very existence threatened Octavian's claim as Caesar's sole political heir. Her subsequent alliance with Mark Antony had divided the Roman world in 2, and culminated in the naval disaster at Actium in 31 BCE. By August of 30 BCE, Antony was dead by his own sword. Egypt was surrounded, and Octavian held Cleopatra as his prisoner. The official Roman narrative is that Octavian wanted Cleopatra alive. He wanted to parade her through the streets of Rome in his triumphal procession, the ultimate symbol of conquered foreign power displayed for the Roman public. Her suicide, according to this telling, was her final act of defiance, denying him his prize. But consider the political calculus from Octavian's side. A living Cleopatra in Rome was a liability. She was charismatic, multilingual, politically sophisticated, and she had a son with divine Julian blood. Roman sympathy was unpredictable. The mob that had wept for Caesar might weep for his lover. A dead Cleopatra, on the other hand, was the perfect conclusion. Egypt absorbed. The dynasty ended, no living symbol around which opposition could crystallize, and if her death could be framed as a suicide, a final, dramatic, self-inflicted act, then Octavian bore no responsibility. His hands were clean. The snake story served Octavian perfectly. It was exotic enough to be believable. It was Egyptian enough to mark Cleopatra as irrecoverably foreign. It carried mythological overtones, the uraeus, the royal cobra of Egypt, the symbol of pharaonic power, turned into the instrument of the pharaoh's own destruction. It was not just a cause of death, it was propaganda. Cassius Dio, writing in the 3rd century, notes that 2 small puncture marks were found on Cleopatra's arm, but puncture marks are not exclusive to snakebite. They are also consistent with a needle, a pin, or any small pointed instrument used to introduce a substance through the skin. The same marks that were cited as evidence of a cobra could equally be evidence of an administered poison, delivered not by Cleopatra herself, but by someone acting on Octavian's orders before the guards conveniently arrived too late. We cannot prove this. The body of Cleopatra has never been found. Her tomb, which ancient sources place somewhere in Alexandria, has eluded every archaeological expedition that has searched for it. Without a body, there is no toxicology report. Without tissue, there is no chemical analysis. The forensic tools that identified malaria in Tutankhamun's blood, that read the DNA of the Romanovs from bone fragments, that traced the arrow angle in Otzi's shoulder, those tools require physical remains, and Cleopatra left none. What she left instead was a silence, and into that silence, the version of events most useful to the most powerful man in the world became the only version that survived. This is the forensic paradox of Cleopatra's death. The evidence that would resolve the question, her body, her tissue, the chemical residue in her blood, does not exist. What exists is text. And text, unlike DNA, can be authored with intent. Every ancient source that describes Cleopatra's death was written under Roman authority, in a Roman cultural context, with Roman political interests shaping what could and could not be said. Plutarch wrote under Trajan. Cassius Dio wrote under the Severans. Neither had access to independent Egyptian accounts. The story they told was the story Rome had been telling for over a century by the time they set it down. The cobra was not evidence. It was a symbol, chosen not because it was true, but because it completed a narrative that Rome needed. The Queen of Egypt, destroyed by the emblem of her own kingdom. Poetic, symmetrical, and deeply, structurally useful to the man who replaced her. What modern toxicology can tell us is what did not happen. A cobra did not kill 3 women peacefully and simultaneously in a locked chamber. That much the science is clear on. What it cannot tell us, not without the body, not without the tomb, not without the physical evidence that 2,000 years of Alexandria's rising waters and shifting earth have buried or destroyed, is what did. The investigation is open. It has been open since 30 BCE. The suspect list is short. The motive is obvious. The murder weapon, if it was murder, dissolved in the bloodstream 30 centuries ago. And the only witness who survived long enough to speak, Charmian, adjusting the diadem on a dead queen's head, said it was fitting. She did not say it was chosen. Cleopatra's tomb is still out there, somewhere beneath the streets of modern Alexandria, or the waters of its harbor. If it is ever found, and if the preservation conditions have been merciful, then the same forensic science that read the bones of Tutankhamun and the DNA of the Romanovs may finally have something to work with. Until then, the most famous death in the ancient world remains diagnosed by propaganda, not by evidence. The cobra is a good story. Toxicology says it is only that.